I'm not going to show any videos because I know last time that you said it's a good opportunity for you to be able to reply to some of the questions. We'll keep it quite short as well this time.
Okay, so what, 30 minutes?
30 minutes to an hour, but
okay.
And I'll mention your book at the beginning and then we'll talk about it at the end as well. And I'll do what I did last time is I'll have a strap underneath you with the name of your book as well.
Okay, thank you.
Just making sure I'm recording.
This is a time for a great reset.
It's the funeral of shareholder capitalism and it's the birth of stakeholder capitalism.
Hello, Thierry. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Richard. Very well. What about yourself?
Yeah, great, thank you. So for anyone who didn't see the interview last time, Thierry Malleret used to work at the World Economic Forum and you led the Global Risk Report there. Am I correct with that, Thierry?
Network. With a report at the end of it.
You also went on to work with Klaus Schwab to write 3 books. One was The Fourth Industrial Revolution, The Great Reset, and The Great Narrative.
Correct.
Hello from the World Economic Forum in Geneva. Delighted to welcome you to this launch briefing for a new book from the forum, COVID-19, The Great Reset. I'm joined by the authors, Thierry Malleret, a former forum colleague, and by Professor Klaus Schwab.
And then last time, what I did, I showed you some clips from my films and my research to show a different narrative than the one that you understood. The rise in authority, the censorship, the cancel culture. This is all Chinese communism. And then it's been how long? About 7 months now, or 8 months since we last had an interview?
Yeah, I think so.
You came on the show last time also because you had a new book. It was called Deaths at Davos. And you've just released the sequel, Deaths at Davos 2. So where do we start? Should we start at the beginning? The World Economic Forum. It was founded in 1971 by Klaus Schwab to enact stakeholder capitalism globally, which was what Klaus Schwab proclaims in one of the videos that I showed you, that he was the pioneer of the stakeholder concept in his words. And then he founded the World Economic Forum as a result. And then he also claims...
Sorry, Richard, may I disagree and express the following idea? I think the causality is inverse. Sure. I don't think he came up with the idea of stakeholder capitalism and founded the World Economic Forum. He founded the World Economic Forum first and then nurtured this idea of stakeholder capitalism as he went.
He in one of his videos, and I've got it here, it's only short, but if we want to know what the facts are, I can show you the video, and he says that he pioneered the stakeholder concept and then he founded the World Economic Forum.
Okay, maybe. I don't, 71 I was a kid, so it could be.
In 1970, as a young professor at the University of Geneva, I pioneered the stakeholder concept. As a consequence, I created the forum as a not-for-profit foundation.
Could be that I'm wrong. In any case, I'm not going to talk for Klaus Schwab, of course.
Of course, yeah. But let's go back to 1971. Klaus Schwab proclaims to have founded the World Economic Forum to enact stakeholder capitalism. And the 2 policies he also talks about ever since the beginning were the environmental and social policies. So, yeah. And they are the 2 policies of stakeholder capitalism. They're the 2 policies that the World Economic Forum really base a lot of their initiatives upon. So environmental also means sustainable, and sustainable ideas have the net zero policy. So environmental, sustainable, net zero all means the same thing. Well, net zero...
Not quite.
Okay, can you tell me
the same thing.
What's wrong? What's different about that then, please?
Well, environmental is much broader than net zero. If you look at the environmental problems that we collectively face at the moment, they can be subdivided into 2 very large groups, which are also very strongly intertwined because they depend on each other. One is climate and the other one is nature. So when you talk about net zero is essentially about the climate. But environment is broader than that, and sustainability is, again, much broader than that. Sustainability can have many different meanings. You keep going
I guess sustainable really means about making the planet sustainable. So it's based upon the concept, like you say with nature, but it's also mainly focused around climate change. And then the solution to these problems of climate change, Klaus Schwab is proposing, is net zero. So that all means essentially the same thing. You've got the environmental issues comes under the sustainable issues. Then the solution, as Klaus Schwab claims, is the net zero. And then on the other hand, you've got the inclusive ideas, which means social. And that's based upon an idea that a subset of our community are oppressed. And then Klaus Schwab's solution to that is diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Inclusive policies are based upon the idea that black and trans people are oppressed. And sustainable policies are based upon the idea that climate change poses an existential threat.
Klaus Schwab claims these alleged crises are being caused by shareholder capitalism.
By transitioning to stakeholder capitalism, he alleges the world will become more inclusive of oppressed people and sustainable by eliminating climate change.
I don't quite understand what you mean.
So there's no connection between...
No, I can't talk for Klaus Schwab again. I don't want to talk for him.
Yeah,
it's not
that's okay.
For many years ago. However, I did write the book with him, The Great Reset and The Great Narrative.
Yeah.
And The Great Reset essentially is constructed around two core ideas. One is that you need to reduce social inequalities because many of the problems we face stem from rising social inequalities.
Which is the inclusive ideas. Yeah, that's to say that a subset...
And the inclusive idea, the EI, is a subset of inequalities, of course.
Okay.
And then the second core idea, beyond reducing social inequalities or inequities, depending on how you qualify them, is to be more respectful of Mother Nature for reasons that I think we all understand.
Yeah.
To diminish the risks posed by environmental degradation, whether it's the climate or nature. So these are the two core themes that underpin the book.
Absolutely, yeah. That's what I was saying. So you've got two ideas, two policies: inclusive, which is the social part of the agenda for the World Economic Forum, and then you've got diversity, equity, inclusion that is designed to address the inclusive ideas, and then separately you've got the sustainable and environmental agenda with the net zero. So they're not connected, but they're the two main ideas, two main policies, categories of the World Economic Forum.
And Klaus, perhaps you can introduce the book, its themes, and tell us what the objectives are for the Great Reset.
I think the world which we want to create with the Great Reset, it will have to be more inclusive. So if we want to avoid some kind of social revolutions, and we have seen the signs of anger on the streets, so we have to address this issue to create a stronger inclusiveness. And finally, more sustainable, because we know now that the next crisis is already waiting for us around the corner, and it is the climate crisis.
So you mentioned then that the focus around the pandemic was that it's going to create more inequality and more problems with regards to climate change, and therefore you wrote The Great Reset. Were these your ideas with regards to inclusive and sustainable, or environmental and social? What role did you have to play in them?
You mean in the book?
Well, the book, but the ideas within the book.
Well, the book is about trying to understand how the world is going to evolve post-COVID. Because throughout history, you observe that every time there has been a major pandemic around the world, it has very long-lasting effects and very often provoke a structural break compared to the time before. So that was our starting assumption. COVID is a big negative shock that's affecting our societies, our economies, and is going to have an enduring impact. And we wrote it in March 2020, so during the first period of confinement, during the first lockdown.
Which is the beginning of the Great Reset, right? Because the Great Reset initiative was also enacted around that time.
It's not an initiative. It's not an initiative.
Well, the World Economic Forum have an initiative called the Great Reset of Capitalism.
The World Economic Forum is now very much engaged into this initiative of shaping a great reset.
This is a time for a great reset.
Reset the ways in which we live.
Maybe.
So my question was were these ideas yours, or did Klaus Schwab get in touch with you and say, let's write a book, let's call it The Great Reset, and these are the two ideas?
No, the idea of the book is mine. Great Reset is my idea. I thought it was a great title.
Okay, so you came up with the term The Great Reset?
I think so, and then we agreed with Klaus Schwab that it was the best possible title.
Okay.
And of course, it triggered all sort of commotions, for the reason that you and I understand very well. But the basic idea consisted in trying to understand how the world post-pandemic would evolve.
It's just strange to me when I'm researching this that the two main issues that are going to be caused by the pandemic at the beginning of the Great Reset are the two policies, the two agendas of the World Economic Forum that were always there since the beginning when Klaus Schwab founded the World Economic Forum in 1971.
No, I think you are wrong, Richard.
I'm not wrong.
The environment was never the core, to my knowledge.
I imagine the conversations back then, in the context of the 70s and the 80s, were freer markets, trade, liberalisation. I assume that was your agenda, correct?
Yes, but don't forget, in 1970, I wrote for the German Association of Machine Building Industries a book on best practices in corporate management. And I think I was the first who at that time coined and created this notion of stakeholder theory, which means that companies have to serve not only shareholders, but all the other stakeholders of the company. So from the beginning on, this was not only a management meeting, this was very much devoted to social and, I should say, environmental issues, because we were the first who gave a platform to the Club of Rome study, The Limits to Growth, which was very important at that time to raise environmental consciousness.
But the two policies that Klaus Schwab explained...
Let me finish, please.
Oh, do.
And explain what my role is. I want to talk about the book, not about the World Economic Forum, because I'm not an employee of the World Economic Forum. I happen to write a book with Klaus Schwab. I happen to have been an employee of the World Economic Forum many, many years ago. I left 20 years ago, I think. So I'm not going to comment on the World Economic Forum. I'm not interested in doing that. I just want to comment on the book, all the two books that I wrote with him, and that capture some ideas that are dear to my...
No, I understand that, Thierry, but my audience and what my interest is in as well is we're interested in stakeholder capitalism. So we want to understand what stakeholder capitalism is, where it's come from.
Then, Richard, I'm the wrong person to interview. You should talk to Klaus Schwab.
But you said, well, Klaus Schwab is unlikely to have an interview with me, but you also said that you've got some views on this. You do have some views. You're not speaking on behalf of the World Economic Forum. Thierry, listen, I'm only just trying to understand things better. I'm not trying to attack you or to put you in a corner. All I want to do is learn a little bit more about the books and the World Economic Forum, and stakeholder capitalism, which is a big part of the Great Reset. So because it's the same policies. Because stakeholder capitalism has got two policies, inclusive and sustainable. As you know, the ESG score of stakeholder capitalism is environmental, social, which are the two policies, governance, ESG.
What is the role of companies in this new post-COVID era? I think we are moving from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism. And I think it's a wake-up call to create a reset in our economic, social, ecological thinking.
Stakeholder capitalism is a new, let's call it an economic system, but with every economic system, it shapes a political system. So, for example, why don't you tell me what the difference between free market capitalism, shareholder capitalism, and state capitalism, which is also considered as communism in the East. what's your understanding of the two existing systems? And then what's the difference between them two and stakeholder capitalism?
I can be very clear on that. My understanding is that when you try to favor a binary approach, it's senseless. It doesn't make any sense, because that's not how the world works. It's not about either you are capitalist or you are communist. Of course, there's these two extremes. We know them. Yeah? There's some systems like North Korea, like Soviet Union, who are communist systems. But when you talk about capitalism, it's a continuum. You have many different forms of capitalism. You have different models. You have some models which are more driven by the idea of shareholder capitalism, like in the US, for example. And you have other systems which are more driven along this continuum, long continuum with many, many shades of gray, by the idea of stakeholder capitalism. At one extreme, you are.
I'm interested in hearing your views. So why? Because you said that you favour stakeholder capitalism. You was in.
No, I never said that. I never said that.
You did in the first. You did in the first one.
Those who privilege favour shareholder capitalism. Those who favour stakeholder capitalism, and I'm in favour of the latter. I think it's a fairer system, of course, because we want capitalism to be as inclusive as possible. That's what it is. And to be also as respectful as possible about the ideas and principles and guiding policies that are absolutely essential for the system to be sustainable. You know, if we want the next generation to live in a world in which you can breathe, in which you can live, in which you are not submitted to this incessant stream of extreme weather events, we know that we need to fix the situation with appropriate policies. And these policies are policies that tend towards net zero, or whatever you may call it. So that's my whole point. That's my entire point.
Can you explain the differences for our audience who don't know stakeholder capitalism? Can you explain what the differences is between maybe shareholder capitalism and stakeholder capitalism, please?
It's very, very simple, because we explained in the book, shareholder capitalism is a system in which the only people to whom you are vis-a-vis you have fiduciary duties are your shareholders. You know, these are the only people you should be taking care of. That's the idea expressed by Milton Friedman.
And that's free market capitalism, of course.
Well, I don't know if it's free market. It's shareholder capitalism. The only people who matter are the shareholders of the companies, which are the engine of capitalism.
Absolutely. And it's used in the West.
But let me finish. You asked me a question. Let me finish. And then you have stakeholder capitalism, in which you go broader than that. You say that, of course, you have an obligation towards your shareholders, naturally, because this is the basis upon which capitalism is built. However, you must also be responsible vis-a-vis the people or communities who evolve in your environment, your workforce, your clients, your communities, etc., from which you can derive all sort of policy ideas regarding the way in which you conduct a business.
So shareholder capitalism is a system used in the West, such as the UK, most of Europe, or Western Europe, and it's also called free market capitalism. It's the system that shapes our democratic system.
No, because free market, stakeholder capitalism is also free market.
Let's come on to that. But shareholder capitalism shapes this free democratic system that we have in the West. Up until 2020, when stakeholder capitalism was globally enacted, our lives throughout the West have been shaped by shareholder capitalism.
Referred to as free market capitalism, shareholder capitalism provides company owners, called shareholders, the freedom to trade without intervention from the government.
Right, and then in the East, they've got state capitalism. In countries such as China, however, freedom is surrendered to the state.
Often referred to as communism, state capitalism restricts companies' freedom to trade by granting authority to the state.
What does it mean, East-West? What do you mean by East?
Well, I'm describing it how Klaus Schwab does. He explains that in the West we have shareholder capitalism, or had shareholder capitalism before 2020, and in the East they had state capitalism. And they're two different systems because...
In Japan, in South Korea...
Well, he says in the East, but he's mainly talking about China. In his book, Klaus Schwab explains stakeholder capitalism replaces the two political systems used by countries around the world.
Concretely, from a system of shareholder capitalism, which prevailed in the West in the past 50 years, and a system of state capitalism that gained prominence in Asia and is centred on the primacy of the state, we should move to a system of stakeholder capitalism.
And on the one hand, we have state capitalism. On the other hand, we have shareholder capitalism. So it's a clash between two systems.
And he says that state capitalism is a system that shifts authority.
Richard.
Sorry, Thierry, can you just let me finish, please? So state capitalism is a system that shifts authority to the state. So basically it's an economic system, but it shapes an authoritarian political system. And then
Richard,
we've got...
I understand you, but please, you're asking me to comment on stuff I don't understand. You're asking me to comment on some statements that Klaus Schwab made. I don't know about these.
That's okay, but this is just logic, Thierry. You don't even need to...
Ask me about my own ideas. I'm not here to comment on Klaus Schwab's ideas. It's not my job.
Well, they're your ideas. They're in the Great Reset book.
Thierry, you co-wrote this book. What are some of the major impacts of the pandemic?
The extent to which the combination of societal and environmental risk is going to dramatically accelerate the transition towards ESG strategies and the stakeholder economy, progressively replacing the shareholder economy, because that's the only way to deal with the looming issues that are ahead of us. I'm ready to talk about the book, but don't ask me all the time to go back to what Klaus Schwab said.
Okay, I won't talk about what Klaus Schwab says. I'll just explain what they are then. We can have a discussion. You said you've got opinions on this. I'd love to hear your opinions. So
yeah, so I just expressed my opinions, and I'm asking you, what does it, East, what does this mean? What's the predicate behind?
Okay, so I will explain. I'll explain, yeah. So we've got a free market, a democratic system in the West, and in the East, in China, they have an authoritarian system, which they call communism, okay? And they call that state capitalism as an economic system. Now, I've got to reference Klaus Schwab here because I've got to use facts, but he's saying that these two systems have got to be replaced with stakeholder capitalism.
I believe that the future is not state capitalism or shareholder capitalism. The future is what I call stakeholder capitalism, which is combined with the social responsibility.
You've just explained that there are problems with shareholder capitalism, and you think that stakeholder capitalism is a more fair system. So what you're saying is there is an authoritarian system being implemented under stakeholder capitalism to force shareholders to operate differently. Is that what you're saying under shareholder?
No, I don't understand what you're saying. What are you saying?
What I'm saying is that if shareholder capitalism is a system that provides the shareholders control, okay, so we can trade in the interest of generating profit for our shareholders, right? That's the whole concept. You're an economist, you know this. And then you've got stakeholder capitalism, okay, which is a system that forces the shareholders to trade in the interest of a wider group of stakeholders.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. Absolutely not.
Why does it not? That's the whole. That's what you've just explained. That's the concept of stakeholder capitalism.
Absolutely not. No. I think you got it completely wrong.
Well, tell me what I've got wrong, please.
Because you can have a stakeholder capitalism system in which your fiduciary duties to your shareholders are respected, which is normal. It just means that there are some societies, capitalist societies, free market societies, in which the shareholders may be more attuned to the need to preserve the interest of the community at large, which is what happens in Denmark, which is what happens in Italy, which is what happens in France, in the UK.
But if shareholders are not able anymore under stakeholder capitalism...
They are, because they've got the shares, they vote. Of course they are.
Yes, but under stakeholder capitalism, so with the ESG score, so this is becoming, it's already mandatory for large companies in the UK. So there is an authority added that you've got to report ESG, environmental social governance. So what this means is that you're scored based upon how environmentally friendly you are, how you adhere to the net
Yeah,
zero
nothing to do
policies.
with the shareholders, Richard. Nothing to do with the shareholders.
Well, it is, because the shareholders are the people that make decisions.
No,
Thierry,
Thierry,
the shareholders.
Listen, you're interviewing me, so let me speak.
Well, I didn't finish answering.
You are confusing. You are confusing voting rights with regulation. I mean, I don't understand what you're talking about.
That's right. Regulation is.
There are some countries in which, in effect, regulators impose some rules regarding the way in which you conduct a business. For example, you can pollute. If you are a mining company, there are some rules to which you have to abide in order not to make the life of the people around the mines impossible, for example.
Exactly,
Okay?
and that's my point.
So is this...
so let me respond to that. So my response to that is...
Are you telling me that this is an absence of freedom?
I'm saying you're saying that there are rules added that the shareholders are
regulation.
Now that's the authority part of it, Thierry. So if there are rules,
you elect a parliament. This parliament promulgates laws, and these laws become rules by which companies have to abide. That's democracy. That's how it works.
I was never asked whether we want to enact a new economic system in the UK where we have rules placed on us, where we can no longer act in the interest of our shareholders to generate profit. We've got to act in the interest of a wider group of people called stakeholders.
I think that's so wrong, the way in which you approach it. It's so... it's such a
well, it's a shift from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism. So we are moving away from shareholder capitalism to another economic system. And you're saying, that it's a democracy, so our governments are enacting this, but they're not telling us. They're doing it.
Well, why don't you vote for people who try to disband the system? You are allowed to do so.
Well, in the last elections, the UK elections, we had Labour versus Conservative. Both Labour and Conservative, Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak.
You had Nigel Farage.
Sorry, please let me finish, Thierry. In the last elections, we had two parties, that were the two main parties. The heads of those parties were members of the World Economic Forum. And both of those heads of those parties...
Members? What are you talking about?
Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer are enacting...
They're not members of the World Economic Forum.
Sorry, Thierry, please. I'll pay the respect to...
That's absurd.
Let me allow me to finish, and then you can respond, please.
No, but this is not true what you're saying.
Well, you've just asked me to listen to you and while you talk, so please do the same for me.
Isn't it an interview? I'm not interviewing you. You're interviewing me.
Yes, but what I'm here to establish is the facts. Okay,
and if your facts are wrong, it's my role to tell you that your facts are wrong.
Okay, and that's right, but let me allow me to explain it.
As somebody said, but not to your own facts.
Around 1/3 of the members are CEOs of multinational companies, 1/3 are leaders of international organizations and governments, and 1/3 are from civil society, forming a truly multi-stakeholder community.
His members include powerful heads of state, from Joe Biden and Keir Starmer to the President of the People's Republic of China.
We are working closely together with governments from around the world, including all G20 countries.
You've cut me off, and I haven't been able to explain how the setup here is in the UK with the UK politics. Okay, under Rishi Sunak, he has made ESG mandatory for large companies.
We're announcing the UK's intention to mandate climate disclosures by large companies and financial services firms across the economy by 2025.
Now, under Keir Starmer's enacting exactly the same policies, the net zero.
We are grateful for your leadership on stakeholder responsibility in accelerating the transition to a sustainable market.
Like all stakeholders, the UK Prime Minister has a responsibility to accelerate the transition to Klaus Schwab's sustainable market.
We will play our full part on the international stage, obviously towards those net zero targets.
Okay, so these are both stakeholder capitalism policies. The heads of both parties which we get to vote for are enacting stakeholder capitalism. So we don't have a choice, really. We're getting it either.
Yeah, of course you have a choice. Become an MP and go and campaign against that if you don't like it. Of course you have a choice.
Okay, but let's just be clear. We're shifting away from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism, a system that you said puts rules on shareholders. They can no longer act in their own interest of generating profit.
No, I didn't say that.
They've got to act in the interest of all stakeholders, all people on the planet. People on planet is the slogan of stakeholder capitalism. People referring to the inclusive ideas, the social ideas. Planet referring to the net zero, environmental and sustainable ideas.
Here are Klaus Schwab's politician stakeholders, the heads of our governments, with the stakeholder capitalism slogan promoted above them at their G20 annual meeting in 2021. People and Planet is also promoted on the cover of Klaus Schwab's book about stakeholder capitalism.
Anyway, let's go back then. You was at the World Economic Forum here.
Sorry, Richard, I have to tell you, I find this deeply dissatisfactory.
I know, so do I. So does everyone else. But that's why we want to have this conversation.
You are fixated. I mean, that's not at all what we agreed upon when we discussed. You are totally fixated on this idea of stakeholder capitalism based on an understanding of the notion that I think is wrong.
That's fine too, but don't get upset about it.
And then some of your facts are plain wrong. When you said
okay, but you're getting upset about it, Thierry.
I'm not being upset.
If I'm wrong,
I'm just telling you that you are asking me to speak with you, and then the direction of travel is totally different from what we've agreed upon. We had agreed upon that we talk about Davos, you spoke about Scaramucci, etc. You haven't asked me one single question about that. You are just fixated on stakeholder capitalism. And I'm telling you, I'm not ready to discuss a notion that I didn't put forward. It's not my concept. So if you want to discuss about stakeholder capitalism exclusively to the exclusion of everything else, talk to Klaus Schwab or someone who writes on this notion. I'm not interested in discussing this any further. I'm interested in talking about the Great Reset, what I wrote the book, and what I think are some valid ideas underpinning what is written in the book.
Okay. Can I ask you a question about Can I ask you a question about young global leaders at the World Economic Forum? Was you a young global leader at the World Economic Forum?
No, I was not.
You weren't. Okay. Do you know what? Can you explain what the young global leaders is?
No. Again, I mean that's not. No, I don't know. I left the forum 20 years ago. Why are you asking me all these questions?
Because young global leaders was in operation then. The two policies that people were taught are inclusive and sustainable ideas.
Yeah, I know that there are some people who were in charge of that. I was not. I was in charge of the Davos agenda, of the Global Risk Network, as you said. I'm not going to comment on something I don't know about.
How did someone with an ambition to transition the entire world to a Chinese communist system get all governments and influential organizations to carry out his plan?
When I mention now names like Mrs. Merkel, even Vladimir Putin and so on, they all have been young global leaders of the World Economic Forum.
Since he founded the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab has been targeting ambitious young professionals and educating them within his Young Global Leaders program to become ambassadors for stakeholder capitalism. By harnessing his powerful network throughout the deep state, Klaus Schwab then places them into positions of power. He explains,
"We integrate YGLs into processes that allow them to have a real impact on global affairs."
What we are very proud of now, the young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina and so on, is that we penetrate the cabinets.
Once he penetrates the cabinets, Klaus Schwab's young global leaders are required to
inform and influence decision-making and mobilize transformation,
with an unsurprising mission
to shape a more inclusive and sustainable future.
So yesterday I was at a reception for Prime Minister Trudeau, and I know that half of this cabinet, or even more, are actually young global leaders of the World Economic Forum. And it's true in France now. I'm with the president.
Here are the heads of all G20 countries propagating the Stakeholder Capitalism slogan at their 2021 annual meeting.
Recent years, you've had Vladimir Putin, and you've had Xi Jinping, President of France, the Chancellor of Germany, leaders from all over the world. To get these leaders, do you have to call them and say you're personally invited?
No, usually the presence is the result of longer friendship in certain cases. For example, Mrs. Merkel. There was a young member from Eastern Germany appointed to the cabinet as environmental minister, and we made her a young global leader. And I could go on and on.
And his young global leaders are dominating other sectors. As Klaus Schwab explains,
they are CEOs of Fortune 500 corporations, in royal houses, in leading NGOs and national non-profits, public figures in civil society, sports personalities, and more.
Okay. At the end of the last interview, you explained that you want to be able to talk about these policies without having to show these videos, and that's essentially what I explained in the email. And then before we began this interview, I explained that what I'll do is I'll mention your book at the beginning. We'll talk about Stakeholder Capitalism, The Great Reset, and then I'll come back onto your book. So we're only a few minutes in, and you're putting up a lot of barriers at the moment.
No. We said that we'll speak until 4 p.m. and we've been speaking 30 minutes for nothing.
I don't understand, Thierry, why you're getting very defensive about this. It's just an open conversation about if stakeholder capitalism is such a wonderful system and I've got it wrong, it should be easy just to be able to, tell me what it is and for me to look silly about it. But I'm trying to do.
Why would I want you to look silly? I mean, that's just absurd.
Well, I'm making accusations that stakeholder capitalism.
I don't want you to look weak or silly, nor do I want to look weak or silly. It's just absurd. It's not a fight. We're having a
one of us
conversation.
is right.
Now, if we can't have a courteous conversation in which you let me speak and you stop asking me about questions, I'm not qualified to respond because I didn't put forward the notion of stakeholder capitalism. You asked me about young global leaders stuff, which is of zero interest to me at the moment. What is the purpose of this interview?
Because it is of interest to all of our audience. It's of interest to me. Look, we've established.
I'm the wrong person, and let's bring it to an end.
Okay. But Thierry, okay.
Let's bring it to an end.
You want to finish this now because you're upset.
Yeah.
Why?
I'm not upset. We had rules to which you're not abiding.
Well, there was never any rules. There was never really rules in.
No, you sent me an email. We said, you will talk about this at Davos 2.0, in which I was.
Yes. So we're here to talk a little bit more about the World Economic Forum, the Great Reset, and stakeholder capitalism, and discuss some of the ideas that we never really had an opportunity to go into detail about last time. And then we can also talk about your new book too.
We haven't. We have spoken for 40 minutes in vain.
Thierry, your attitude is so different from the first time we spoke. What has caused it?
I don't think it is.
Well, I'm sure all of the audience will agree that your attitude has changed completely. You're shutting down, you're putting barriers up, you want to leave, you don't want to talk about anything. You don't want to talk about the Great Reset, you don't want to talk about stakeholder capitalism, you don't want to talk about your time at the World Economic Forum. All you want to do is just come on and talk about your new book, which I'm very glad to share and talk about with you. But one of the main reasons why you're here...
Listen, we've been on air now for 40 minutes for nothing, in my opinion. So, Richard, let's agree that we disagree. Let's bring it to tertius end, and that's it. And please don't use this video, and we'll leave it at that. And then, if one day you want to have a serious conversation about this at Davos 2.0, what it means, about tariff policies, about the Great Reset, the ideas that underpin the right.
Let's talk about the Great Reset.
I'm delighted to do that, but this interview, you look bad, I look bad. So let's forget about it and bring it to an end.
I don't look bad, Thierry. Okay.
Okay.
I'd like to make you look good. Okay. If we can just talk about the Great Reset, then I'll just ask you questions about the Great Reset.
You started by asking me 2 questions at the beginning, to which I responded. And then you move all the time towards stakeholder capitalism. You have this fixation over stakeholder capitalism.
I know, because stakeholder capitalism, as we just said...
And I told you...
Thierry, you're not letting me finish. You're not letting me finish anything. You're just shutting me down.
Aren't you the person interviewing me?
Okay, and I'm responding, but you're not allowing me to respond.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So at the beginning, we established that the World Economic Forum was founded to enact stakeholder capitalism. Okay, and the two policies were the two policies that you're writing about in your book, The Great Reset. There's a link. What I'm trying to do is link it all together. I know that you have nothing to do with stakeholder capitalism. I'm not trying to blame you for anything. Okay, I'm just trying to understand everything better, as is all my audience, because you said there are a lot of conspiracy theorists out there. Okay, and this isn't helping, remove those conspiracy theories. But what I'm trying to do as a journalist is work out what that link is. Okay, the World Economic Forum was founded to enact stakeholder capitalism. Its two policies are inclusive and sustainable. They're the two policies that have been driving the World Economic Forum the whole time.
In this World Economic Forum address, Klaus Schwab welcomes Xi Jinping as a stakeholder to govern us.
We should join hands and rise to the challenge.
And he encourages all stakeholders to enact stakeholder capitalism's inclusive and sustainable policies.
I believe this is the best time for leaders to come together and work jointly for the world to become more inclusive, more sustainable.
I'm confused because it's supposed to be, according to the slogan, improving the state of the world.
Committed to improving the state of the world.
Yeah, but the two policies that they focus on mainly are things to do with the social stuff, and I'd love to understand what that is a little bit more, and then the environmental policies. And these are also the two policies of stakeholder capitalism. They're the two policies that you claim that you believe are the biggest problem as a result of COVID. Now, all I'm trying to do is understand the link between all of them, and then what stakeholder capitalism is. So I don't want to argue with you. I think you're a good person. I really like you. I do.
Let me respond briefly to your point. First of all, I think your understanding about what the World Economic Forum truly is wrong. It's not an institution destined to put forward policies, even though Klaus Schwab created this concept, elaborated on the concept of stakeholder capitalism. The World Economic Forum is an organization that brings together different people from different horizons to discuss ideas together in Davos or elsewhere. So it's not in the business of promoting policies. It's not a public organization. It's private. It's not a think tank. It's just a gathering of people.
So from the beginning on, this was not only a management meeting. This was very much devoted to social and, I should say, environmental issues.
And it happens that Klaus Schwab has an interest in stakeholder capitalism. True. So no policies are being pushed forward at the World Economic Forum. And when he said that Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer are members of the World Economic Forum, no, they're not. The World Economic Forum, to explain how it works, there are 2,000 members who happen to be 2,000 CEOs of the world's largest global companies from all over the world, and then they invite 1,000 members, and then they invite 1,000, 2,000 other participants, policymakers, researchers, intellectuals, media leaders, artists, to contribute to the conversation. That's what it is. Nothing more, nothing less.
But it's that's fine. But when I try to go into more detail, you get defensive. Okay, and
I don't get defensive.
So this is what I will respond to that. So the UK government, the US government, most governments around the world, or as Klaus Schwab claims, all G20 countries have a partnership with the World Economic Forum. If you type in someone like Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer, they've got a profile page showing their membership on the World Economic Forum.
No.
If I look at our stakeholders, we have business, of course, then we have politics, we have partnerships with many governments around the world, then of course we have NGOs, we have trade unions. Media, of course.
And they are driving the stakeholder capitalism's policies, the net zero policies. Net zero come from Klaus Schwab. He designed that. Yet Keir Starmer in the UK, who says When he was asked the question, where does your allegiance align to, either Westminster or Davos, he said Davos.
The World Economic Forum is where our leaders' loyalty lies.
You have to choose now between Davos or Westminster.
Davos.
Why?
Once you get out of Westminster, whether it's Davos or anywhere else, you actually engage with people that you can see working with in the future.
And he's pushing Klaus Schwab's net zero policies. Okay, so what is net zero?
Let me ask you a question.
Can I ask you what?
No, let me ask you a question
please do.
Prove or disprove your point. Is Donald Trump implementing today the policies of the World Economic Forum?
Trump is opposing stakeholder capitalism's policies. He doesn't appear to be a World Economic Forum stakeholder, a member. A key stakeholder is Klaus Schwab.
Like Rishi Sunak or...
Well, no, he doesn't appear to be a key stakeholder at the World Economic Forum. He's pushing back against it.
Of course he is.
No, Biden was. The Democrats are.
So, no, you're wrong. You're wrong.
Well,
he came as the president. He couldn't come this year, but it was all about him. He intervened in a plenary session, online, okay, but in a plenary session. So, no, you're totally wrong.
My administration has taken action to abolish all discriminatory diversity, equity, and inclusion nonsense, and these are policies that were absolute nonsense. I terminated the ridiculous and incredibly wasteful Green New Deal. I call it the Green New Scam. Withdrew from the one-sided Paris Climate Accord.
So the Democrats, they were pushing DEI.
How do you define inclusive capitalism, specifically regarding gender, race, and ethnicity?
To make stakeholder capitalism appear more inclusive, it relies on equity policies, which are at the core of this stakeholder's presidential campaign.
When you take into account the fact that not everyone starts from the same place, particularly when we take into account race and gender. To put equity firmly at the center of our economic policy.
Can I ask you what net zero is, please?
Oh, listen, you already asked me. Richard, please.
I have never asked you what net zero is, Thierry.
We are, as you say in French, tourner en rond. We are
going round in circles.
We are going around in circles.
But I've never asked you what net zero is, Thierry. I'd love to understand what it is. It's a policy that we have in the UK that Keir Starmer's pushing. It's a policy to do with the Great Reset because it's all the environmental policies. Okay. Yeah. All I'm asking you is a simple question. What is net zero? That's the solution to the sustainable and environmental issues that you're writing about in the Great Reset book.
Yeah.
What is
net
it?
Zero is about decreasing carbon emissions to the maximum possible extent. In a nutshell, that's what it is.
Okay, so that's the zero part. So that's no carbon emissions.
Precisely.
Okay. So what does that world look like when we've got
possible?
What does that world look like when we have no carbon emissions? How does that affect us, the people?
What do you mean?
If you're not allowed to burn oil anymore, if you're not allowed to use oil for energy, after this call, I'm going to jump in my car, which is powered by diesel. Hopefully, in the summer, I'm going to go on holiday on a plane that's powered by diesel, by oil.
Mm.
How does net zero affect us when you want to ban all oil?
Well, net zero has never been about banning all oil.
Well, that's the zero part. It's zero carbon emissions.
We demand at this year's World Economic Forum immediately and completely divest from fossil fuels. We want this done now.
And Klaus Schwab's solution to the alleged climate crisis?
It's the decarbonization of the economy to protect us against let's say, an environmental virus.
The decarbonisation of the economy is Klaus Schwab's net zero policy.
We must accelerate its transition to net zero.
Which means banning everything that emits carbon.
The main solution is so simple that even a small child can understand it. We have to stop the emissions of greenhouse gases.
This includes our use of diesel and petrol vehicles, as well as travelling by plane.
We must change almost everything in our current societies.
You have the wrong understanding about what net zero really is. It's about increasing to the maximum possible extent carbon emissions and increasing to the maximum possible extent energies that don't emit carbon, of which there are plenty.
Right, so you're saying that zero doesn't mean zero emissions?
Well, of course not. It's an endeavor, it's a target, it's a goal.
It's a goal, but why are they going for zero, okay, if it's not achievable?
It is achievable in the long term, and that's precisely what it is.
Okay, so you're
2035, 2045, 2055, it depends, depending on each country or industry to operate according to its own limitations.
Okay, so there's a lot of information that shows it's 2030, okay, which is the time when we reach stakeholder capitalism is 2030. 2030, the number comes up all the time.
No,
so you're not aware.
2045, it depends.
You're not aware, but the Great Reset, okay, is an initiative. Okay, it's called the Great Reset of Capitalism at the World Economic Forum.
What is at the forefront is to create a new model, a new concept, a new definition of capitalism.
Often, Klaus Schwab and his stakeholders promote the Great Reset transition to stakeholder capitalism subtly.
The Great Reset Initiative has a set of dimensions to build a new social contract.
And sometimes
we must reinvent capitalism.
They're more direct.
The world must act jointly and swiftly to revamp all aspects of our societies and economies. Every country from the United States to China must participate, and every industry from oil and gas to tech must be transformed. In short, we need a great reset of capitalism.
They enacted stakeholder capitalism in 2020. The Great Reset is the name of a 10-year transition to stakeholder capitalism by 2030. Okay, and net zero, the plan for net zero is...
I think you read the book properly, or that you read the initiative properly.
That's I know, but that's your book, okay? But Klaus Schwab at the World Economic Forum, his initiative is the Great Reset of Capitalism. He writes about that quite openly. Okay, you would have seen it in the last video that I shared with you in our interview. I put it there. Even our King Charles, talks about the Great Reset of Capitalism.
The Great Reset is the name of our 10-year transition to stakeholder capitalism.
It's a time frame repeated throughout the Great Reset's initiatives.
Britain to impose petrol car ban by 2030.
As explained by Klaus Schwab.
A social contract to transform our world by 2030.
And confirmed by the King himself.
With 2020 being seen as the super year, kickstarting a decade of action for people and planet.
A decade of action for people and planet also being the slogan of stakeholder capitalism.
Charles explains,
inspired by the Great Reset's call to action, I called for a Marshall-like plan for nature, people and the planet.
He wants to
reset the ways in which we live.
The King is one of many powerful stakeholders colluding in the Great Reset transition to stakeholder capitalism.
Is a 10-year transition to stakeholder capitalism. That's Klaus Schwab's goal since he founded the World Economic Forum, was to transition the world to stakeholder capitalism. That's his baby. That's what he wants. And he's enacted this Great Reset of Capitalism to get us there by 2030. So I know, listen, Thierry, I know this is hard for you.
I'm not sure you understood what I said at the beginning. It's not for me to comment on what Klaus says or what you understood. You think Klaus said. It's not for me to do that. I made it very clear at the beginning. That's not how it works. Sure. You are not inviting me on your show to comment on somebody else's ideas or declarations or pronouncements.
But you wrote a book called The Great Reset.
So I'm talking about the book, and in the book we don't give the deadline.
Okay. Does it upset you that I'm conveying a narrative that's very different than the one that you've been led to believe?
Well, what upsets me is that you don't abide by the rules to which we agreed upon before we had this interview. I said, don't ask me about Klaus Schwab, don't go back all the time to Klaus Schwab, because I'm not the person who is in a position to comment on Klaus Schwab. I don't work at the World Economic Forum. I simply wrote a book with him called The Great Reset, and I'm more than pleased to discuss the book and what it is all about. But don't bring me back constantly to what Klaus Schwab said this, he does that. I'm not even sure that you're right when saying he has a plan until 2030, maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I'm not aware of it.
It's your world, which we are discussing here. And to integrate you into this great reset initiative is absolutely essential.
The Great Reset of capitalism will only work if it includes everyone.
Unless we rapidly tackle the challenge, we will not be able to build inclusive economies or achieve our sustainable development goals.
Why does the pandemic cause social problems and environmental problems to an extent that you needed to write a book called The Great Reset?
It didn't cause environmental problems.
Okay.
It didn't.
That's not how the
works.
Can you explain what happened, please, for you to write that book?
Well, did you write the book? Did you read the book?
Yes, I've read the Great Reset book.
Yeah, so it's explained very well in the book, I think, I hope.
Well, you've asked me to ask questions about the Great Reset book.
I think the effect that the pandemic had is to make clear the extent to which nature is absolutely vital to us. Because, as you may remember, in March 2022, there was still a huge amount of unknowns regarding the pandemic. And what was made absolutely clear at that time was the fact that there was a very clear correlation between air pollution and the occurrence of the pandemic. So we understood at that time that nature, preserving nature, was absolutely vital, because when we don't, we end up having zoonotic diseases, for example, of which COVID is an example. So we thought that after COVID, we would pay much more attention to nature, the preservation of nature. That's the argument put forward in the book.
I'm still struggling to work out what COVID had to do with climate change.
No, nature. I said nature.
But you're talking about. So what you're saying is that COVID had an effect on nature, and nature has effect on climate change.
Exactly.
So what was the effect that COVID had on nature?
I just told you. It made us aware collectively, for the first time, that air pollution can have a very tangible effect on the way in which diseases propagate. Because there was a clear demonstration, which you can find in zillions of medical papers, which have been published since, that air pollution had an incidence on the way in which COVID propagated. And because of the way in which the lockdown took place, there was a lot of evidence that people were connected with nature, that nature was a solace for many, many people.
I don't see the connection, unfortunately. So COVID has a relationship with... So the spreading of the virus has a relationship with nature.
Of course.
How?
Of course.
How? I don't know. I don't understand.
I told you. I gave you two examples. One is zoonotic diseases.
Can you explain that a bit more, please?
Yeah, zoonotic diseases is when animals transmit diseases to humans.
Okay.
And
so
there was still a suspicion that one of the origins of COVID might have to do with the fact that deforestation causes animals to migrate from the forest to mingle with human groups. Well, you may laugh, but...
My viewers are going to be sitting there saying, okay, right, well, the World Economic Forum was founded in 1971 with two agendas, inclusive and sustainable, social, environmental, okay? That's been their agenda for the past 50 years. Then they enacted this great reset of capitalism, okay, to transition us to this stakeholder capitalism. And stakeholder capitalism's two policies are inclusive and sustainable, environmental and social, with its credit score, environmental, social, governance, okay? And then the Great Reset, which you're saying has got nothing to do with all of this, its two policies are environmental and social, and there's this leap that you're trying to associate climate change with COVID somehow. For me, it's all getting very, very...
Richard, I'm so sorry. It's now 6:15. I have a meeting in 15 minutes in town.
Okay.
We said that we'd leave it for 30 minutes. It's been an hour almost. I need to go.
I'll finish up with your books, Thierry. Okay, I'll talk about your books.
Well, I need to go. I have a meeting. I need to walk to my meetings.
You don't want to talk about your books?
Well, I don't have time, sadly. I don't have time. I don't think you should be using this interview in the way we just had it.
Okay. Look, Thierry. Look, listen. This is how a lot of our viewers are going to see this. Okay. This is how a lot of our viewers are going to see this. They're going to see this as that you joined the World Economic Forum. There is this Young Global Leaders, program where the two policies are inclusive and sustainable. Please don't shut me down. I'm just going to finish this. I'm just going to explain how they see this, okay? And they see you being indoctrinated with these ideas, these inclusive and sustainable ideas, okay? Like many people at the World Economic Forum. And then the Great Reset. And then the Great Reset was enacted to transition us to stakeholder capitalism. And sadly, you've been used by Klaus Schwab to write these books. He needed an author. And these are his ideas. These are not your ideas because they're ludicrous.
Okay. Go ahead with this. I can tell you one thing. I did many interviews with people whom you certainly respect, like Naomi Wolf and others. And I can tell you that the rules of engagement and the tone of the conversation is totally different from the one we just had. And I'm just appalled by the fact that the rules to which we...
Thierry, we are appalled that we're being transitioned to another system that gives them authority.
Okay.
This is a serious matter, okay? This is very serious.
We can have another conversation if you're ready to have a decent conversation.
There is a rising authority at the moment. Net zero removes our freedom to travel with no more carbon emissions.
Richard, please, let's stop. Don't use this interview. Or I'll be very upset. And let's agree that one day we may have another conversation in a much more conducive, peaceful.
Okay, well, I'm going to pay you some respect. Okay, Deaths at Davos is a book that Thierry wrote recently. It's about a organisation called The Circle, of which the person who runs the Circle is the Don, and it's all based out of Davos, and it's about a murder that happened in Davos. And this is your moment to talk about the second book, if you want. Please feel free to go ahead, and I won't interrupt you.
I have an important meeting with a client in 10 minutes, 15 minutes. I need to walk there. It's 10 minutes. I can't. Sadly, we run out of time.
All right. Well, I've paid you the respect to promote your book as well, but I'm thank you for coming on and having this conversation. But I feel like it's been barrier after barrier after barrier.
Absolutely.
This is
so
important.
Don't use it.
It's an important matter.
Don't use it as it is, because we both look very bad. Okay?
I don't look very bad. This is my work. I'm being a journalist.
If you're happy with it.
If you don't like being asked hard questions...
Please, bring this to an end. I need to go. We said that we'd go until 4 p.m. It's 4:18. I need to go.
Okay. Thank you very much for joining.
Bye.
Bye.
This is a time for a great reset.
It's the funeral of shareholder capitalism, and it's the birth of stakeholder capitalism.
So that was a heated debate that I had with Thierry. Okay. So just one thing I want to say about my interaction with Thierry before we begin. We've got a few people that have joined the chat and would like to ask some questions. So Thierry is a good person. He, like many people, has been influenced by these bad ideas, which are the inclusive and sustainable ideas. And it's affected many people at the moment. The ideology, we know it as being woke. So the woke ideology is somebody who's been affected with stakeholder capitalism's inclusive and sustainable ideas. The inclusive ideas being that a subset of our community are oppressed by free market capitalism, and that we need a new political system, a new economic system to solve this problem, to make them more inclusive. And that's cultural Marxism. Mao used this to get rid of any capitalist ideas during the Cultural Revolution in 1966. And so what it appears to be that Klaus Schwab and his chums at the World Economic Forum or other organisations in the early days in 1970 were looking at ways in which they can transition us away from free market capitalism to an authoritarian political system, which is essentially what stakeholder capitalism is. And they use these ideas, these inclusive ideas, this cultural Marxism ideas that have been effective for generations to shift countries, populations away from their free democratic system to an authoritarian system, which is communism generally. So they've essentially used this, they've called it inclusive, and the idea is to say, yep, you're oppressed, and we've got this system that makes you more inclusive and more equal, which is the equitable term in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So equity, equal, essentially is communism. So we have a system where the tyrants are propagating that they're saying that you're oppressed, and that this new system makes everyone equal. And they during the Cultural Revolution, Mao indoctrinated the young working class to go out and join the Red Guards, and they essentially went out and overturned capitalism in favour of communism. We see that on the streets today with Black Lives Matter, gender identity movements. They're all protesting for a more equal system, for a more inclusive system, which is stakeholder capitalism. And then they have another idea which is sustainable, and that's been propagated, as Klaus Schwab explained, since the beginning of the World Economic Forum in 1971, and of course by other prominent leaders during that time and authoritarians. So at that time there was people like Maurice Strong and the Rockefellers, all they created the United Nations, and they were big promoters of the sustainable ideas. And that idea is to say that the planet is on the brink of destruction due to climate change. It was called global warming then, and unless we give up our freedom to burn anything that emits carbon, which is pretty much everything we do, then we'll all perish. So it's a way to induce fear among the population, and to encourage us to then want a system that's more sustainable and with less freedom. And then the inclusive ideas, again, it's a way to induce anger among the working class during the Cultural Revolution. Now it's different demographics such as black people, trans people, females, anyone really but white men. And to say that shareholder capitalism is causing us oppressed, and that we need a new system that makes us all equal and more inclusive. So these are ideas that are being propagated, and that's all what communism is. It's a cult. It's an ideology. It's a way to get us to believe something that's not necessarily true, and to make us want a new system that shifts authority to a group of authoritarians. And the difference between shareholder capitalism and stakeholder capitalism is that stakeholder capitalism is a global authoritarian system. So I received a question in the chat to say, who acquires the authority? Who makes up these rules? And Klaus Schwab explains, and you might have seen that in my documentary, Stakeholder Capitalism, that it's his key stakeholders who acquire the authority, and they are the heads of most Fortune 500 companies and most G20 countries and NGOs such as the World Health Organization, the United Nations and the EU. And all of these key stakeholders, excluding the heads of the large organizations, are people that Klaus Schwab has placed into positions of power, and through his Young Global Leaders program, most of whom anyway, and indoctrinated them with these inclusive and sustainable ideas. And they are essentially ambassadors for stakeholder capitalism. Their role is to shift us to stakeholder capitalism. But we know that it's wrong, because why are our leaders, why are our presidents and prime ministers not telling us about this? If this was a fair move to another political system that generally makes us more inclusive and sustainable, then they will be saying we are going to move away from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism. But I would say 99.9% of the population around the world have never heard of stakeholder capitalism before. It's new to them. So it's all being done discreetly, and the people who are the heads of the governments are just pushing the policies, like we see, and as explained and demonstrated with evidence there in the film, that the heads of the governments, people like Rishi Sunak here in the UK and Keir Starmer, they're all promoting the policies of stakeholder capitalism, such as net zero, but not necessarily telling us that we're shifting to another economic or political system. So first up, joining me is Roger. I'm going to add you now, Roger, if you can hear me. Just a second, I'm going to shift over to. Hi, Roger. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Brilliant. Okay, so Roger, I know that you've done a lot of research into the net zero policies and net zero ideas. Was there anything from that interview that you found interesting with regards to your research into net zero?
I don't think that he addressed any of the technical issues. I think that the focus is on basically.
Sorry,
scaring...
Roger, do you mind just holding the camera away just a little bit so we can see your face? That's brilliant. Thank you.
Sorry.
That's great. Thank you.
I think that hopefully that's better. No.
Yeah, just pointing it at yourself and yeah.
Okay.
Brilliant. Wonderful.
Yeah, I think that they don't address the technical issues. I mean, the thing that I focus on is the impossibility of net zero. And it's impossible because the targets are far from possible, because we don't have the materials, we don't have the money, and we don't have the skilled resources needed to deliver by those dates. I mean, the grid is supposed to be what they call carbon-free by 2030. Now, what you probably have seen from one or two of my articles is that we have about 30 gigawatts of nuclear and gas-fired power plant due to retire by the mid-30s. We have no chance of replacing that the way things are going at the moment, because everything that's going in is of the renewable type. It's wind and solar, which do not provide much at certain times of the year. In fact, virtually zero. That means that every gigawatt of wind and every gigawatt of solar has to be paralleled, supplemented by the same amount of gas turbines, batteries, or hydrogen, whatever form they decided to go for, whatever form of backup power. And that clearly is not going to happen. We have going to have something like 600,000 roadside EV charging points by the mid-30s. Now, they've taken the view, the ESO, the systems operator, that all of the EV chargers won't be switched on. At night, the domestic EV chargers, they can be controlled so that the energy is shared out over 10 hours. But that is their assumption. What they've forgotten is that the government plans 600,000 roadside EV charging points, rated at least 100 kilowatts each, to be installed by 2035, with loads that cannot be phased overnight. So even if 70% of them are in use, then they, plus a few million heat pumps, could take maximum demand to over 80 gigawatts, which is 60% above the current MD, whereas the electricity system operator is assuming that the load will only increase, the maximum demand load will only increase by 10%. That's risible. Add to that loads of millions of electric cookers, power showers, plus electric trains, and a few data centers, plus 1.5 million new homes, and the 10% is absolutely ridiculous. It's not going to happen. But I've seen this before. I was a deputy leader on the local district council at one stage, and every time the council asked the local service supplier, like the water company or electricity company, if they could meet the demands from a new development project, they would just say yes. They never went back and said, we're going to check. So, and this is what is happening, I think, with the ESO. If you ask the ESO whether they can meet this demand, they try and find a reason why they might be able to, but the reason is flawed. So it is impossible. It's okay to tell people about the impact of carbon emissions from human activities. It's all very well for them to focus on that, but they are ignoring the realities, and the people who don't understand the issue of carbon, the impact of carbon emissions, their eyes just glaze over. But what they are going to see is they are going to see a bill of probably for something equating to nearly £50,000 over the between now and 2050. And then on top of that, you've got the upgrading of the local. That figure is just to upgrade their internal distribution systems. But on top of that, you've got the local electricity system, including thousands of grid transformers, distribution transformers, followed by upgrading the grid capacity with new generation and transmission equipment. And before its demise, National Grid told us it would cost around £3 trillion to deliver net zero.
So Roger, yeah. I mean, well, for me, it's just down to logic. You've got this one very powerful figure that wants to transition us to another political system, which is essentially what stakeholder capitalism is. It's propositioned as an economic system, but with every economic system, it shapes a political system. In this case, this shifts power to the world's most powerful people, and its policy net zero is being rolled out around the world. So you've got Mark Carney now pushing it in Canada. You've got Starmer and other people all around the world. All the key stakeholders are pushing it. Now, if it's come from this one person who is unelected, I mean, we've got to question it, first of all. We're not getting a vote for it. This is being pushed on us. So in my opinion, first of all, it's, if that it just seems like a policy that's that is authoritarian, right? Because as you say, it's going to be very difficult to reach net zero unless it will impact us. What is going to be the impact on everyday person by 2030 if they want to try and remove all carbon emissions?
It will mean that there will be rolling power cuts. They're not even ordering the backup plant. Every time there is a new question raised with Ed Miliband, his response is more of the same. In other words, more wind power, more solar power, which doesn't operate at night, as I was saying earlier. So we will see rolling power cuts at some point, by which time you'll probably be in the wilderness. And I hope you might even be on the first man trip to Mars. But he is going to have to be got rid of fairly soon. And I put my money on the fact that within 6 months he will be gone, because we can't continue down this road where we already had in January a very close call. There was almost rolling power cuts. Next winter, if it happens to be a very hard winter, and a few of the gas turbines and the nuclear facilities have started to close, then we will get power cuts. And they're not even ordering the backup power that is needed to cover them at night in the winter.
For me, it's the removal of our ability to travel as well, as I mentioned there. If we're not going to be, we won't be allowed to fly. We won't be able to own petrol or diesel vehicles. Essentially, Klaus Schwab has created these 15-minute cities where we would have to reside, and he says that that's fine because we'll have everything we need within a 15-minute walk. That's what it's designed upon. And if we want to leave those 15-minute cities, we need to pay a carbon tax. So thank you. Sorry, do you want to say last thing? Before?
Well, I was going to follow up on the LTNs, the local traffic networks. Around Oxford, a lot of people are coming out of the town and going onto the ring road to get to where they want to be in the town. So they're bypassing the L10 zones, and they're creating more congestion and emitting more CO2.
So for anyone who's not in the UK, we've got these low traffic neighbourhood systems that have been implemented around the country that restrict transport and our ability to drive in specific towns. So it's just a way for them to start implementing this net zero agenda and create restrictions for our freedom of movement in vehicles. So thank you for joining us, Roger. I'm going to add Dayton now. So thank you. Hi, Dayton. Do you have a question at all?
Hey, Rich. Well, actually, I was late in arriving, so I didn't hear the discussion so far. But I wanted to ask you if this may seem like a weird question, but are his books about? First of all, I think it was cool of Thierry to do the interview because he obviously knew that you were not a supporter of the WEF going into it, and it's strange to me that he didn't. He just seemed to never want to say anything. Like, just answer the question about what, like, the Great Reset book, what it was about for him or why he did it. It was just like pushback the whole time, which was strange. But the thing I wanted to ask was,
can I just respond to that though?
Yeah.
With bad ideas, there's not a good argument to have, and that's why censorship is rife in communist countries. So, and we've seen it here since the Great Reset was enacted in 2020. Censorship and cancel culture. The idea is that there isn't any narrative that you can to argue with. So you've just got to shut down the opposing voices. People like myself, where I've just had my Facebook account banned again, so Yellow.Forum is no longer on Facebook, and I've lost my personal Facebook account. We had our YouTube suspended and removed in 2020 when I made the first documentary. And the idea really is that for people like myself who present an opposing narrative, they can't compete, so it's shut down. And as you say with Thierry, I think Thierry is a nice guy. I think he's very well intentioned, and you've got to give him credit for coming on and having a debate with me, and I really hope that we can have more debates, open debates on this. And Thierry is certainly, in my opinion, not one of the key stakeholders who acquires control under stakeholder capitalism. He, like all of us, are going to be the people that are going to be the victims of this authoritarian regime that seems to be implemented around the world. So sorry for interrupting. Please go ahead.
No, that's all right. I agree with everything you just said. I guess the thing I was trying to figure out is why he's just promoting his book, his fiction books, is what I understand from that, and that's his. So what I wanted to ask was, do you know if his fiction books are interesting, and in particular if they relate to anything having to do with the WEF, or is that something that we have to buy his book and read it ourselves to find out?
Yes, it's of course they're interesting, but it's not a narrative that I subscribe to. So essentially,
but I mean the Death in Davos book.
Yeah,
the Death in Davos fiction.
Exactly. So
okay.
So you either see the world in two different ways. It's black or white at the moment. Either Trump and Musk are the dictators, the far right authoritarians, and the Democrats and the Labour Party here in the UK. These are all promoting inclusive ideas, and that's fair. So Thierry has adopted the idea, of course, because he's been part of that World Economic Forum network for so long and pushing these inclusive and sustainable ideas. And you've got to ask, well, this is supposed to be a forum that is committed to improving the state of the world. But why are they not addressing other issues such as the huge wealth gap that's happening between their members and the rest of society?
Yeah.
Ever since the beginning, it's been two policies: inclusive and sustainable. And these are ideas because you can see Thierry has, in my opinion, this has come from Klaus Schwab, and Klaus Schwab is a master of manipulation. He's a very, very clever guy. 17 doctorates, and he's propagated these ideas and essentially convinced Thierry that the Great Reset was his idea, which is, and the inclusive and sustainable ideas was his idea. And, the evidence shows that, Klaus Schwab has been promoting and pushing these ideas since he founded the World Economic Forum in 1971 to enact stakeholder capitalism. So Thierry is a victim of this, just like the rest of the people around the world that are adopting these inclusive and sustainable ideas.
Yeah, it feels to me like the whole idea behind the propaganda is that they adopt ideas that are kind of unassailable. Like, of course, everybody wants there to be equality and everybody wants a clean environment, and they adopt these ideas and then they use it to defeat. Like, if the purpose is to solve those problems, it seems to me that the solution would be decentralization, giving people more control over their lives and the environment and the world that they live in. And instead they use those ideas and the scare tactics to centralize power and to disempower individuals. And like you say, it seems to be modeled on the CCP type totalitarian system, not anything having to do with democracy.
Absolutely.
And
my research now, it's leaning a lot more towards the CCP. This is an expansion of the CCP throughout the West. So while we do see a lot of these Western organizations and tyrant figures, it looks like it's they that are leading this. There is I think that Xi Jinping, the head of the Chinese Communist Party, it looks like it's a partnership with these tyrants to be able to, enact Chinese communism throughout the West, and that's what we're seeing at the moment.
Yeah, I'm worried about that, and I think that it's just. I think one of my concerns is that because they hide behind these noble ideas, like Javier Milei or the Argentinian libertarian president at the WEF in that same session that was recent that you used the clips from Trump at, he also addressed the WEF, and he said that the WEF had embraced these obvious good ideals, and they've corrupted them and they've used them to trick people into their agenda. And that's the thing that I always worry when I see anti-WEF things, that people who are indoctrinated or aren't aware will think that anybody who's anti-WEF is a racist or doesn't believe in that there are environmental issues that and I think that people need to understand that the people who believe the least, I think, in those ideals are actually the people that are running the WEF. They're exploiting the trust of common people in those obvious ideals, and they're using that as a shield to do something where they really don't care about that. That's also why I think that, I don't know, but I think that net zero and all that is being used more to enact a power plan than any actual intention to go there. I mean, I don't know what the actual intention is beyond power on the behalf of the people doing it.
Yeah, net zero seems to me.
We won't know until after that transition what they plan to do with that power, and that's a scary thing too. But it's obviously some kind of attempt to consolidate power, and the fact that Thierry acts like it has nothing to do with anything like that, it just shows either how compartmentalized his view is, like he has no ability to kind of zoom out and question the greater narrative and everything else around him, like as if he doesn't even want to think about that. It's very concerning to me. It's like, okay, yes, you want to focus so tightly on the goodness of the importance of the environment and the importance of not being a racist, and of course everybody agrees with that. But then they take these extra steps, like air pollution led to COVID because deforestation led the bats to go. Those stories are so preposterous. It's so preposterous.
And also, I mean, that was the story at the beginning of the pandemic, and we now know
it's already been completely debunked. But it's even absurd. It was absurd from the beginning. The things that they expect people to believe, and then that somebody like Thierry would believe it like full stop without any questioning, and wouldn't even be able to address the question. It just means that he's gotten himself into some kind of state where he can't see out it. He can't question the world, the bubble that he's in, or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, that's propaganda, isn't it? It affects the beliefs, and it doesn't matter what evidence you present to someone who is indoctrinated with specific beliefs. It's irrelevant, because beliefs are more powerful than anything. You can't remove beliefs by just presenting evidence. But you're absolutely right. And even the idea that, where Thierry said that, don't we all want to make capitalism more inclusive? What does that mean? Well, of course we all want to make the world inclusive. We all want to include everyone, of course.
Yeah.
But what you're assuming is that people are not included at the moment. Okay, so my question is, well, tell me a scenario where a black person or a trans person is not allowed to, is segregated in some way, is not allowed to, go to the workplace, or whatever. There aren't those rules, and there are discrimination rules to protect.
Yeah, there are laws already on the book for that, and plus it's, it always makes me nervous to even play in that realm. They're trying to shift the narrative in that realm so that people get trapped by, like, oh no, you are racist because you don't agree with his blanket statement that racism is bad. And I don't even want to play that game or go through that exercise with you, because we know that it's bad, and we know that the solution of complete centralization of power is not going to help anybody. It's going to hurt everybody, and it's going to hurt the people at the bottom the most, frankly.
Well, communism's killed over 100 million people. You just need to look at history. So, when you're consolidating power to a group of the world's most powerful people, including Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping, Klaus Schwab describes it there. It's and in his book that this is a new system that provides authority to the heads of all G20 countries, one of whom is Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping isn't going to want a free democratic system with the system that he's already got in China. He's not going to go, okay, everyone, right, let's go back now. Let's remove all the authoritarian and all the totalitarianism that we're implementing.
I don't want to bash Xi Jinping or China, but I do think that the West, to the extent that the West still exists as an idea, we should be encouraging the democratization of China through all of our policies, instead of the totalitarianism of the West. And I think that the problem is largely driven by the fact that the Chinese economic model has been so successful over the past 20 years, not only for the elite in China, but also for the economic, the China's GDP and overall wealth. It has worked so well that the people at the top in the U.S., the Bill Gateses and the kind of old money oligarchs, they want to emulate that. They've convinced themselves that we need to be more like China to be on an even playing field with China. And I think that they gave up on the idea of trying to get China to become more democratic. Mm-hmm. And there are reasons for that China is a very different country. It has a different history. I don't think we should. I think I'm going to contradict myself now, but I don't think we should be imposing on China what they should do. But I also think we should be careful about not trying to emulate the Chinese system in the West, because a few dumb people at the top of our power hierarchy think that that's the best strategy for the West. I think that it, like you have suggested over and over again, if we're going to do that, it should be something that happens democratically, where the conversation is broadly open about it. Do we want to switch to a system like that or not? And instead, it does appear to me that it's being done through a lot of propaganda and a lot of this kind of race baiting and these distraction tactics, so that they can, because it's not easy to take away countries' sovereignty, people's individual freedoms. People aren't going to vote for that. So their strategy is to kind of shift the narrative away from that while they do it. And that's why, as you say, it's a deceptive thing that's going on. And I want to also ask you if you have, your forum and your videos have been really helpful for me. And how can all of us kind of help people open their eyes to what's going on through the way that we communicate with others, or how is your do you feel like it's a success? Your Yellow.Forum is a success, or
no,
how do
it's
we
not.
open up that discussion?
I'm incredibly frustrated because I've got this message to share, and it's not getting enough traction. And in my opinion, that's I was quite active in 2020 and 2021. Made the New Normal documentary that was went very viral at the time, and that expressed some of my views around the fourth industrial revolution, essentially to provide a warning about what's coming up and the Great Reset then, and a lot of people were working together. But for now, this new media, independent media landscape has completely transformed, and it feels very competitive. Everyone's competing against each other, and the feels like there is no real strong freedom movement because people are not collaborating. So I'm very concerned at the moment. I've got a message to share. I'd like to get the reach much wider. I did see comments in YouTube when there was only 40 people watching the live stream that, how can it be that there's only so many people watching this? And that's because it's not getting shared by the people with the big networks. People are not coming together and collaborating. Instead, they're working against each other.
The algorithm, the YouTube algorithm, all these things are biased against this kind of conversation, and I'm not sure why. I think that the algorithm must have. It's a as a YouTuber and a person who uses social media, you probably know that it's basically a black box to YouTubers what's happening. And I think that there are probably keywords and other things that trigger kind of shadow banning all the time throughout the system. But the only answer to that I can think of is other platforms that are completely outside of mainstream social media, or government intervention through, cracking down on somehow social media banning speech. But there's the problem of the Trump administration has tried to do that by saying that the government itself is not going to do it, but it doesn't control what private companies do. So if they're subscribed to their own agenda, they can still do whatever they want to do.
I think a lot of people don't realise how bad this is, right? And people were very reactive because we had the pandemic. It was bad then. There was a big movement. We pushed back against a lot of the vaccine passports and some of the other authoritarian ideas. But stakeholder capitalism, that's their agenda. That's their aim, is to get us there by 2030. And so, I mean, they're not going to give up on that. And so. It terrifies me knowing what the world looks like by 2030, and if we're just going to be reacting on X and just posting comments, then we're in a silo in a small part of X, and mainstream media is going to continue to propagate these ideas and push us further and further towards communism, when that's what essentially communism is. It's an ideology, and I think that we do need to come together and have a plan, because I am petrified where we're headed. So so that that's a call to action as well. If there is anyone who may be able to help spread the message much more widely, I would love to hear from you. And we're all about partnerships at the moment. So
thanks, Richard. It was great chatting with you, and good job on the interview. And thanks also to Thierry for being as good of a sport as he was. I don't think he'll be back again, though.
No, well, I'm going to write an open letter to Thierry. I'd love to, my aim, of course, is to continue communicating with Thierry and hope that one day he comes back and has another conversation, because ultimately, like I said, Thierry is a victim, like all of us, is on our side, and, at the end of the day. So, if someone like...
Also, speaking directly to Thierry, you need to zoom out, and you need to answer these broader questions. To say that you're just focused on the Great Reset and you have nothing to do with stakeholder capitalism, it defies all logic. You have to at least do your own research and understand what you've contributed to and start to address it. I mean,
if someone like Thierry was to realize precisely what's going on and essentially become a whistleblower, it'd be brilliant for us.
Helpful.
Yeah. It'd be a hero. So Thierry, if you're watching this, we want you to become a hero.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for joining us. I really enjoyed this conversation. So
thanks a lot, Richard.
Have a nice evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you too.
All the best. Hey Lara, nice to see you. So you're a member of Yellow.Forum, and you'd like to ask a question. Was there anything in particular you'd like to ask with regards to what you just saw with the interview?
Really, I would like to ask, from the interview, it seemed to me like Thierry didn't actually understand what he'd written about in the book. I couldn't grasp his actual... He didn't put into words what the book was actually about, the Great Reset. He didn't explain that at all.
Well, I think what he was trying to say was that the pandemic was happening, and immediately Klaus Schwab had got in touch with him and said, let's write a book. And Thierry says that it was the Great Reset was his idea, but I question that. And of course 2020 was, as soon as the pandemic happened, it was the enactment of the Great Reset initiative, and Thierry needed someone to propagate these ideas within a book, the Great Reset, and Klaus Schwab already had these ideas that essentially capitalism becomes broken. It has to change because it affects it causes inequalities, and this is all part of the inclusive idea, and it will cause more the climate to change and worsen, so what Klaus Schwab had done, he tried to link the pandemic somehow to these two ideas, and then encouraged Thierry to promote these ideas within the way that he can. He writes really well. So I think Thierry understands it. It understands what the Great Reset book is from his own standpoint. But I think what I'm doing now, I'm connecting the dots and saying actually the Great Reset, this idea, is much more than a book. It's an initiative by the World Economic Forum, and it's part of the Great Reset is actually a 10-year transition to stakeholder capitalism. So what I think he's starting to kind of piece the puzzle together based upon the first interview and this second interview, and I've taken some time to add videos and other bits of evidence, so when Thierry does watch it back, he can see that this argument that I've posed and put forward to him is all based upon fact. It's not a conspiracy theory.
Yeah, it felt to me like he didn't explain himself very well at all. I think you had a better understanding of the book than he did from the interview, because he was getting in such a state about the questions you were asking. He wasn't, and some of the concepts really, how is that going to compute down to normal people level, peasant level? Their ideas for net zero are obviously going to completely change our whole economic system as well, and they've not taken into consideration how we're going to be able to move forward without being able to drive, for instance. And from what Roger was saying as well, I think what they're doing with the net zero, from what I could work out, if we're going to have all these blackouts to get to the net zero end result that they're promoting in the Great Reset, we're all going to be carbon credits for that week, and if you've used it up, you're going to turn the power off to your house, and you can just see that climate emergency lockdown coming quite quickly for them to impose the net zero agenda on us, because they can't just take away all our cars, can they? Or is that what Thierry was saying? They're just going to take everyone's cars away and the planes away, so we cannot move around.
Well, Thierry has got this idea that it's going to happen much more slowly, and it's going to give us time to create more technology to enable net zero to happen. So a lot more solar panels and so forth, solar farms, and to provide us with the power. But that's not the plan of Klaus Schwab of stakeholder capitalism. The plan is 2030. He wants to transition us to stakeholder capitalism by 2030, and he's an authoritarian. So the idea of net zero is to remove our freedoms in many different ways, and the whole carbon idea is, if everything we do emits carbon, whether it's talking now over the internet, because the internet and all the devices that we're using is powered by fossil fuels that coming from the electric grid at the moment, then it creates restrictions. It enables them to turn around and say, what we are doing, we are killing the planet, therefore we need restrictions on every part of our lives. And then the way around it, and they've always got a loophole for them who are the super rich. The people who can live freely without the restrictions are the people who can afford to pay for these carbon credits. So everyone who is going to be, every bit of carbon that we emit is going to be scored. So we have these credits. So if we do want to travel somewhere, even in an electric car, then we have to pay these carbon credits, and of course this enables the stakeholders, the key stakeholders, to continue living freely. You can see them flying into Davos every year in their private jets, because they're saying they offset their carbon by paying these carbon credits, and those carbon credits plant trees on the other side of the world, which soaks up the carbon. So it's a way for them to be able to live freely, while us, as you say, us peasants, live within these restrictions on our lives. So
within what he was saying as well, all they're concerned about is the shareholder or the stakeholder. They're really not concerned about the rest of the population. They're only concerned, from what I could gather, about the people that run everything, and they're not taking into consideration the population at all. And also, from what Roger was saying about the whole electric grid, we have another big issue where they've implemented new infrastructure in the UK. All the new cell towers we've got that do consume a hell of a lot of electric. They want to make Southend, where I live, into a smart city. And how is that going to be powered if we're not going to have enough electricity to cook? But they're going to have enough electricity to power a smart city where they can track you everywhere you go and how much carbon credit you've used that day. So the whole thing doesn't really add up very well for me.
Yeah, well, of course, they make sure they've got enough electricity available to monitor us via facial recognition and every other part of our lives. So as we know, it's the China's the model there. So so thank you very much for joining us, Laura. Thank you.
Yeah, good to see you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. So I also have a couple of questions from the chat as well. So who decides the rules? The rules are made up by, as I mentioned, the World Economic Forum's members, which essentially positions the World Economic Forum as this global government. So the way it works is there is, the key figures, Klaus Schwab, Xi Jinping, quite a few other key stakeholders who are very powerful elites, and then below that you've got those key stakeholders who implement the rules for this global government. People like Keir Starmer and Biden, or many people in the Democrats, people around the world in the governments that are implementing these rules. But so it gives this illusion that we've still got a democracy because we've still got a government that we vote for. But as the film showed, we've got Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer in the UK. So it's not really a democracy. Both of those people, whatever person we vote for, we're getting stakeholder capitalism. So they give us this illusion that we live in a democracy, but essentially the heads of these governments are driving the World Economic Forum's policies, or the policies of stakeholder capitalism. So is it healthy for democratic countries to be allowed to have policies swayed by such large corporations who have shareholder interests? That's exactly the same again. So so what Klaus Schwab has done as well. I mean, this leads on to the fourth industrial revolution, which is a period in our future when artificial intelligence takes our jobs, and what happens is this big wealth shift over to the companies who own the machines. They essentially win capitalism, and I'll be making a lot more content on this later on. So capitalism does essentially crash at some point, and these big organisations become this huge monopoly and become responsible to provide everyone with their basic living wage via a UBI, universal basic income, in the currency of a central bank digital currency. This is all a lot more we'll talk about in a documentary and on Yellow.Forum. But essentially what Klaus Schwab has realised is that these corporations will hold all the power, and I think that was all part of Klaus Schwab's pitch to them. And what does the Great Reset transition to stakeholder capitalism look like? Well, it looks like what's happening right now, but it's fairly easy at the moment. The worst is still yet to come. So in order to get us to full stakeholder capitalism, so imagine Chinese communism on steroids. That's where we need to be by 2030, and they've got a plan to get us there, and there are several crises that they will implement, not just the climate crisis from net zero. There's a financial crisis, a lot of other things like a cyber attack, and so that I've seen from the World Economic Forum's reports that they're forecasting over the next couple of years that will hurt us badly, and this is why I'm very worried at the moment and feel that we've got this small window of opportunity to come together now and push back. And what does that look like? It is a revolution. That's the only way. This is a global coup-d'état that's happening at the moment. So the only way to stop this is the people rising up, because there are no politicians. And that was another question that I saw in the chat, that why don't we? I think a question that Thierry asked, why don't we vote for somebody different? Because there isn't anyone in the UK. There's not a main party that are pushing back on these policies. I think the next elections anyway is not for another 4 years. So the only way to solve this is a revolution. It's the people coming together from the content that I've created, and this is why I've invested all my time and energy into working on this, is to acquire the evidence so that we can push back on them. We can actually show that we've got the evidence now to prove that we're being transitioned undemocratically to this global authoritarian political system, and that the heads of our governments are committing treason, essentially, and treason is a crime. So there are enough people in the freedom movement who are aware of what's going on in the world, and there's enough of us to be able to drive that revolution. I think that's the only way of stopping this. It's a scary time, but it does require people to come together, and for us to start working together and to push back. Part of the problem as well for me is that a lot of people are focusing on the United Nations with their 17 Sustainable Goals. The 17 Sustainable Goals is designed by Klaus Schwab. So for anyone who's unaware of the United Nations 17 Sustainable Goals, the United Nations have got Agenda 2030, and Agenda 2030 is essentially the blueprint, the blueprint for what stakeholder capitalism looks like by 2030, which was essentially designed by Klaus Schwab, and the 17 Sustainable Goals points to all the different sectors that will be transformed under full stakeholder capitalism by 2030. But Agenda 2030, as somebody who's working as a journalist, there's nothing incriminating within that. If you look at Agenda 2030, you can say, well, okay, so what is it? It's got these 17 sustainable goals, and they want to end poverty, for example. Okay, so what's bad about that? And it's very difficult to argue that as an issue where stakeholder capitalism, that is the agenda, is to transition us to stakeholder capitalism. It's an undemocratic transition away from one political system to another political system. And the people who are enacting this is committing treason, and treason is a crime. So part of my mission, I guess, is to encourage people to start talking about stakeholder capitalism, seeing this as a move from one political system to another, and start calling and making hard accusations for treason for the heads of the governments around the world that are all ambassadors of stakeholder capitalism and acting in the interest of of Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum. So thank you very much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this production. It takes a lot of work to do to create all the evidence and all the videos for these interviews and other things. So if you'd like to support us at Yellow.Forum, my apologies so far. I haven't been particularly active in Yellow.Forum, and that's just because it just takes so much time creating all the work. But from now on, I'm going to be a lot more focused on the forum and bringing people on board to help drive initiatives and create more awareness to hopefully push back on some of these policies. So thank you for joining me this evening, and have a great evening.